Chapter 1, The Great Escape. The silk tie felt less like a fashion statement and more like a gilded noose. Devin Dalcarlo stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the bridal suite of the Dalcarlo estate, staring at a stranger. The omega in the reflection was draped in ivory lace and pearls, his skin powdered to a porcelain pallor to hide the frantic flush of his pulse. Outside the heavy oak doors, the string quartet was tuning their instruments, the upbeat chirps of violins sounding to Devin like the sharpening of knives. Lavender and cinnamon. The scent was thick in the room, churning with the sour metallic tang of his own anxiety. It was a signature scent his parents had spent years perfecting with specific diets and supplements, designed to be the perfect, calming accompaniment to an alpha's power. A masterpiece, his mother had whispered earlier, touching his cheek with a hand that felt like ice. Victor Bishop is paying a king's ransom for you, Devin. Don't ruin this. I am not a masterpiece, Devin thought, his jaw tightening. I am a line item on a balance sheet. He looked at the window. It was a 20-foot drop to the manicured gardens, but a sturdy trellis of climbing roses offered a thorny ladder. You have 5 minutes, Master Devin, a guard called through the door. I'm just centering myself, Devin replied, his voice steady despite the hammer of his heart. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the silver letter opener from the vanity and, with a jagged sob of defiance, sliced through the expensive lace of his sleeves. He stripped off the heavy ceremonial robe, revealing the simple black turtleneck and slacks he'd layered underneath. He lunged for his go bag, a battered rucksack hidden behind the velvet curtains, stuffed with his passport, a few thousand in crumpled cash he'd skimmed from his allowance over a year, and a bottle of high-grade scent blockers. He scrambled over the windowsill. The rose thorns tore at his palms, the stinging pain a grounded reality compared to the suffocating luxury he was leaving behind. He hit the grass with a muffled thud, his breath hitching. Run. He didn't head for the main gates. He knew the security bypass in the southern hedge, a gap he'd discovered as a lonely child. As he squeezed through, the wind caught the scent of the estate, old stone, stagnant water, and the oppressive floral arrangements of a wedding that would never happen. By the time he reached the outskirts of the city, the sun was dipping below the skyline, casting long, bruised shadows across the pavement. He ducked into a grime-streaked public restroom, his hands shaking as he unscrewed the cap of the scent blockers. He downed the bitter liquid and sprayed a neutralizing mist over his clothes. The lavender and cinnamon faded, replaced by the sterile, chemical smell of the city. I'm a ghost now, he thought, looking at his reflection in a cracked, graffiti-covered mirror. The porcelain doll was gone. In his place was a man with dirt under his fingernails and fire in his eyes. He stepped out into the neon blur of the downtown district. He needed a place to hide, somewhere an alpha like Victor Bishop, a man who breathed the rarefied air of penthouses and boardrooms, would never think to look. He pulled a crumpled newspaper clipping from his pocket, roommate wanted. No questions asked. Low deposit. I'm coming for my life, Devin whispered into the roar of the evening traffic. And if Victor Bishop wants his property back, he's going to have to find a man who no longer exists. Chapter 2, The Outcast Sanctuary. The address was a bruised-looking brick walk-up in a district where the streetlights flickered with an arrhythmic, dying pulse. Devin stood on the stoop, his lungs burning from the chemical sharp sting of the scent blockers. For the first time in his 22 years, he didn't smell like a botanical garden. He smelled like nothing. He felt invisible, and for a rogue omega, invisibility was the only true luxury. He knocked on the door of 4B. It swung open to reveal a man who seemed to take up the entire frame. Devin instinctively recoiled, his inner omega screaming alpha before his brain could process the details. The man was broad-shouldered with sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms dusted with dark hair. He smelled of cedarwood, deep, grounding, and surprisingly calm. You the one about the room? The alpha asked. His voice was a low rumble, but it lacked the jagged edge of command Devin had grown up fearing. Devin. I saw the ad, Devin managed, clutching the straps of his rucksack until his knuckles turned white. I'm Elijah. Come in. Don't mind the mess, Miko's on a deadline. The apartment was a chaotic symphony of lived-in comfort. There were stacks of books on the floor, a half-eaten pizza box on the coffee table, and the frantic clack-clack-clack of a mechanical keyboard coming from a corner nook. Elijah. Is that the new guy? Tell him if he drinks my oat milk, I'll file a police report. A lean, energetic man bounced out from behind a computer monitor. He was an Omega, but unlike the soft, decorative Omegas of Devin's social circle, this one looked like he'd survived a lightning strike and enjoyed it. He smelled of honeysuckle, sweet, but with a wild, green undertone. I'm Miko, he said, wiping a smudge of ink off his cheek. He squinted at Devin, his eyes sharp and analytical. You look like you've seen a ghost. Or like you're running from one. Devin stiffened. Is it that obvious? I just need a place. I have the deposit in cash. I don't need much space. Elijah leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms. We're pretty low-key here. I work for a tech subsidiary, boring corporate stuff, lots of spreadsheets. Miko's a financial reporter for Channel 8. As long as you pay your share and don't bring drama to the doorstep, we're good. Corporate subsidiary. Devin felt a cold trickle of sweat down his spine. Which company? Bishop Innovations, Elijah said casually. The CEO is a bit of a hard ass, but the benefits are decent. He's actually been off the grid today. Rumor has it his fiancée bolted right before the ceremony. Can you imagine? Some poor kid probably realized he was marrying a glacier. Devin's heart did a frantic somersault. He forced his face into a mask of polite indifference. Sounds dramatic. It's the lead story tomorrow if I can get the confirmation, Miko chirped, hopping onto a bar stool. The Dalcarlo family is freaking out. They're offering a reward for information, which is basically code for bounty. Total alpha nonsense. Miko reached out, his hand hovering near Devin's arm in a silent gesture of comfort. You're shaking, kid. You hungry? We've got leftover Thai. Devin looked at the two of them, an alpha and an omega living as partners, as equals, in a space that smelled of old paper and home-cooked food instead of polished marble and fear. For the first time since he climbed out that window, the tightness in his chest loosened. They don't know who I am, Devin realized. And for the first time in my life, I might actually find out who I am, too. I'm starving, Devin admitted, his voice small. Good, Elijah grunted, pulling a plate from the cupboard. Sit. In this house, we don't care where you came from. We only care that you do your dishes. As Devin sat at the scarred wooden table, he let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for years. He was in the lion's den, living with an employee of the man he'd jilted, but as the scent of honeysuckle and cedarwood drifted around him, it felt more like a sanctuary than a cage. Chapter 3, Defiance in the Shadows. The flower was the only thing that could truly mask him. By the third week, Devin's hands were perpetually dusted in white, his cuticles dry and his muscles aching in a way that felt like a badge of honor. He had found work at the East End, a cramped, hole-in-the-wall bakery 3 blocks from the apartment. The owner, a beta woman with hearing aids and a no-nonsense attitude, didn't care about his lineage or his lack of a resume. She only cared that he could knead dough until his knuckles bruised. In the early morning hours, as the scent of yeast and sugar battled his suppressed lavender and cinnamon, Devin felt a strange sense of peace. I am Devin, the baker's assistant, he told himself, slamming a lump of sourdough onto the floured wooden bench. Not Devin Dalcarlo, the runaway bride. Not the Bishop merger asset. But peace was a fragile thing. When he returned to the apartment that evening, the air was charged. Miko was hunched over 3 different monitors, his honeysuckle scent spiked with the sharp, acidic tang of adrenaline. Elijah was sitting on the sofa, nursing a beer, looking unusually somber. You're late, Miko said without looking up. The clack-clack-clack of his keyboard sounded like gunfire. Double batch of rye, Devin lied easily, setting his bag down. Everything okay? Miko spun his chair around. His eyes were bloodshot, the sharp gaze of a reporter who had caught a scent. The Bishop Dalcarlo story just hit a wall. A total media blackout. Someone is scrubbing the internet of the "missing Omega" posters. It's not the Dalcarlos, they're too desperate for the money. It's Bishop. He's burying the scandal. Devin's heart did a slow, painful roll in his chest. Victor. He's protecting his pride. Or he's hiding the evidence of his failure. Maybe he just wants privacy, Elijah offered, his cedarwood scent flickering with unease. The guy looked like a ghost at the office today, Miko. He didn't look angry. He looked hollow. Like he'd lost a limb. Or a trophy, Devin snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. Both men looked at him. Devin froze, his hand tightening on the strap of his bag. He'd broken the first rule of being a ghost, don't have an opinion. Miko stood up slowly, walking toward Devin with a predatory grace. He didn't look at Devin's face, he looked at his wrists. Devin instinctively pulled his sleeves down, but he wasn't fast enough. Miko had seen the faint, circular indentation on Devin's inner wrist, the mark of a high society suppression cuff that only the ultra-wealthy wore to tame their omegas before a wedding. That's an expensive scar, Devin, Miko whispered, his voice dropping an octave. I don't know what you're talking about, Devin said, backing toward the hallway. I've been looking at your face for 14 days, Miko continued, stepping into Devin's personal space. I've been staring at grainy security footage from the Dalcarlo estate for 6 hours. The hair is different. The clothes are cheap. But those eyes. Miko, leave the kid alone, Elijah warned, standing up. It's him, Elijah. Miko turned, pointing a finger at Devin. He's the rogue Omega. He's the one who left the most powerful alpha in the tri-state area standing at an altar in front of 500 people. The silence that followed was deafening. Devin felt the walls closing in. He waited for the judgment. He waited for Elijah to pick up the phone and call his boss to secure a promotion. He waited for the found family to turn into a cage. Instead, Miko reached out and gripped Devin's shoulders. Do you have any idea how legendary that is? Devin blinked, his breath hitching. What? Everyone thinks you were kidnapped or killed, Miko said, a wild grin spreading across his face. But you're here. You're working in a bakery for minimum wage instead of sitting in a gold-plated cage. Devin, that's not a scandal. That's a revolution. Elijah walked over, his large hand coming to rest on Devin's head in a grounding, protective gesture. The company is tearing itself apart looking for you, kid. If they find you here, they'll ruin us. You know that, right? I'll leave, Devin whispered, his eyes filling with hot, frustrated tears. I'll go tonight. Like hell you will, Miko barked, pulling him into a fierce hug. The smell of honeysuckle was overwhelming now, protective and warm. You're one of us. We outcasts look after our own. But you need to be careful. Victor Bishop isn't just a businessman, he's a bloodhound. And if he's burying the story, it's because he stopped looking for a fiancé and started hunting for you. Devin buried his face in Miko's shoulder. For the first time, he wasn't running alone. But as the wind rattled the thin glass of the apartment window, carrying the distant, cold scent of the city, Devin couldn't shake the image of Victor Bishop's face. Was he really hollow? Or was he just sharpening his claws? Chapter 4, The Scent of Wood Smoke. The fear wasn't a scream anymore, it was a low, vibrating hum beneath Devin's skin. It had been 5 days since Miko and Elijah had pledged their loyalty, 5 days of looking over his shoulder at every shadow, and 5 days of wondering if the man he'd jilted was a grieving lover or a vengeful hunter. The answer arrived on a Tuesday, carried on the damp, biting wind of a brewing storm. Devin was hauling a heavy sack of flour toward the back of the bakery when the bell above the door chimed. Usually, he didn't look up. But the air in the small shop suddenly shifted. The scent of yeast and sugar didn't just fade, it was annihilated. Coffee and wood smoke. The smell hit Devin like a physical blow to the solar plexus. It was dark, rich, and dangerously familiar, the scent of a rainy morning in a high-rise office, the scent of the man who was supposed to own his life. Devin ducked behind the industrial mixer, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He's here. How? How did he find me? From his hiding spot, he saw polished Italian leather shoes step onto the flour-dusted floor. Then, a voice, deep, resonant, and weary, broke the silence. "I'm looking for someone," Victor Bishop said. He didn't sound like the glacier Elijah had described. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in a month. "We're closed for walk-ins, sir," the bakery owner, Mrs. Gable, grunted from the counter. "Unless you're here for the rye." "I'm looking for a boy," Victor continued, ignoring her. 5'10". Scent of lavender. Probably wearing scent blockers that smell like a hospital corridor. He's my fiancé." "Don't know any fiancés," Mrs. Gable replied, her voice steady. "Just have bakers. Now, if you aren't buying, you're trespassing." A long silence stretched. Devin squeezed his eyes shut, praying the industrial mixer was thick enough to hide his own skyrocketing pulse. He could feel Victor's presence, the sheer gravity of an alpha in distress. "He's not a trophy, if that's what you think," Victor said softly, almost to himself. "I just need to know he's eating. That he's warm." The chime rang again as Victor exited. Devin collapsed against the cold metal of the mixer, gasping for air. When Devin finally stumbled back to the apartment that evening, he felt like a dead man walking. He burst through the door, only to stop dead. Elijah was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. The room didn't just smell like cedar wood anymore, it was stained with the lingering, ghostly trail of coffee and wood smoke. "He came to the office today," Elijah said without looking up. "A surprise inspection of the subsidiary. But he didn't look at a single spreadsheet, Devin. He walked straight to my desk, stood there for 10 minutes, and just breathed." Devin's breath hitched. "He smelled me on you." "Yeah," Elijah looked up, his eyes filled with a grim realization. "I didn't say anything. I swear on my life, I didn't tell him a word. But he knows. He lingered by my coat for so long I thought he was going to take it with him. He's tracing the scent, Devin. He's narrowing the circle." Miko emerged from the bedroom, his honeysuckle scent sharp with agitation. "I checked the satellite feeds for this block. There's a black SUV parked 2 streets over. It's been there for 4 hours. He's not calling the police. He's not calling your parents. He's waiting," Devin whispered, his inner monologue a chaotic swirl of terror and a strange, traitorous spark of curiosity. "Why didn't he just take me? He has the power. He has the guards. Why is he standing in a bakery asking if I'm warm? He's playing with us," Devin snapped, trying to harden his heart. "He's a predator. He's letting the prey exhaust itself before he moves in for the kill." "I don't know, Dev," Elijah said softly, rubbing his face. "I've seen predators. I've seen alphas on the warpath." Victor Bishop didn't look like he was hunting. He looked like he was haunted. Devin turned away, staring out the window at the rain-slicked streets. Somewhere out there, in a black car, a man was sitting with the scent of wood smoke clinging to his expensive wool coat, waiting for a lavender-scented ghost to reappear. "Let him wait," Devin said, though his voice trembled. "I'm not going back to the cage." But as he laid in bed that night, the smell of wood smoke seemed to seep through the floorboards, curling around him like a promise, or a threat, he couldn't escape. Chapter 6, The Uncomfortable Truth. The tension of the previous night had settled into a heavy, thoughtful silence that hung over the apartment like a morning mist. Elijah had gone to work early, looking pale, while Miko sat at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of tea and watching Devin with the keen, protective eyes of a hawk. "He's downstairs," Miko said softly, nodding toward the window. "No guards. No black SUV. Just a silver sedan and a box of pastries from a shop that isn't yours. I think he's trying to be subtle." Devin smoothed his hands over his jeans. He had scrubbed the flour from his skin, but the scent of lavender and cinnamon was back, vibrant and honest, no longer masked by chemicals. He took a deep breath, nodded to Miko, and headed down to the street. Victor was leaning against the car, looking remarkably human in a plain leather jacket. The scent of coffee and wood smoke greeted Devin, but today it felt less like a forest fire and more like a hearth. "I thought we could walk," Victor said, his eyes searching Devin's face for any sign of retreat. "There's a park 4 blocks over. It's out in the open." "Safety in numbers?" Devin asked, his voice tinged with a lingering spark of his old defiance. "No," Victor replied seriously. "I want everyone to see that you're walking beside me by choice, or not at all." As they walked, the urban noise of sirens and distant construction provided a strange soundtrack to the dismantling of Devin's past. Victor didn't start with apologies, he started with facts. He pulled a thin manila folder from his jacket and handed it to Devin as they reached a quiet bench beneath a skeletal oak tree. "I spent the night pulling the last of the forensic accounting on Dalcarlo Holdings," Victor said. Devin opened the folder. His breath caught. These weren't just business ledgers, they were receipts for his own life. He saw the dowry Victor had paid, but beneath it, he saw the redirected funds. His father hadn't used the money to save the family business. He had moved it into offshore accounts, preparing to flee the country and leave Devin behind as a buffer against the creditors. "They weren't just selling you to me, Devin," Victor's voice was low, vibrating with a suppressed alpha growl of anger, not directed at Devin, but for him. "They were using the marriage to freeze your personal trust. If the ceremony had finished, your father would have had legal power of attorney over everything you owned. He was going to strip you of your name and your inheritance, then leave you to deal with the Vane family when the Bishop merger inevitably stalled." Devin felt a cold, hollow sensation in his chest. He thought of his mother's ice-cold hands and his father's talk of duty. "I wasn't a masterpiece," he realized, his inner monologue a bitter whisper. "I was a distraction. A human shield. Why didn't you tell me at the gala?" Devin asked, his voice trembling. "Why let me believe you were the one holding the leash?" Victor turned on the bench, his knee brushing Devin's. The scent of wood smoke flared, warm and comforting. "Because I was a fool, Devin. I thought I could play the hero from a distance. I thought if I acted like the cold, untouchable alpha, your parents wouldn't suspect I was working to undermine them. I didn't realize that by playing the monster to them, I became the monster to you." Victor reached out, his hand hovering inches from Devin's before he pulled back, giving Devin the space to choose. "Your father called me this morning," Victor continued. "He told me he found you. He offered to help me subdue you for a fee. He thinks I'm still the man who buys people." Devin looked up, his eyes burning with a new, fierce clarity. The rogue in him wasn't just a reaction to a wedding, it was his true nature. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that if he ever approached this district again, would release the audit of his embezzlement to the federal authorities," Victor said, a small, dark smile touching his lips. "And I told him that Devin Dalcarlo no longer exists. There is only a man named Devin, and he is under the protection of people much more dangerous than me." Miko and Elijah, Devin realized, a soft laugh breaking through his tears. "Exactly," Victor said. "They've already threatened to leak my private tax returns if I make you cry." Devin looked at the folder, then at the man beside him. The betrayal of his bloodline was a heavy weight, but the discovery of Victor's true heart felt like the first rays of dawn. He reached out and, for the first time, took Victor's hand. Victor's skin was hot, his pulse steady and strong. "I'm still not moving back to the estate, Victor," Devin said firmly. "I wouldn't dream of it," Victor replied, closing his fingers gently around Devin's. "But I hear there's a vacancy in the apartment across the hall from you. I'm told the landlord is a fan of high-end coffee." "Wow! You made it this far. If you like to hear more original stories, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. Now, let's move to the next chapter. Chapter 7, Forging a New Destiny. The transition from high society asset to independent baker was a steep climb, but Victor's attempt to transition from corporate warlord to regular guy was proving to be a mountain of its own. The courtship was a delicate dance performed in the narrow hallways of the apartment building and the sticky booths of the local diner. Victor had, true to his word, rented the unit across the hall. He had also swapped his tailored suits for dark jeans and high-end knitwear that still cost more than Devin's annual salary, but at least made him look like he belonged in a world that didn't have a concierge. "A date?" Devin asked, wiping a smudge of flour from his nose as he opened the door to find Victor standing there with a single, perfectly bloomed sprig of honeysuckle, a nod to Miko's protective presence. "A date," Victor affirmed. "No limos. No reservations. Just, a walk to the pier and some of that greasy fish and chips you told me about." The scent of coffee and wood smoke was lighter now, relaxed. Devin felt a flutter in his stomach, not the bird trapped in a cage panic of his wedding day, but the nervous, electric hum of a choice being made. "Let me get my coat," Devin smiled. The evening was perfect until it wasn't. They sat on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the harbor, the salt spray of the ocean mixing with the warmth of their dinner. Victor was listening, really listening, as Devin described the satisfaction of perfecting a sourdough starter. "It's alive," Devin said, his eyes bright. "You have to feed it, care for it. It doesn't grow because you command it, it grows because you provide the right environment." Victor watched him, his expression soft. "I'm learning that lesson myself, Devin. I spent so long building empires that I forgot things of value need to be nurtured, not managed." But the peace was shattered by the screech of tires. A silver SUV, familiar and hated, swerved to the curb. Two men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a man whose scent was a cloying, artificial sandalwood that turned Devin's stomach. It was his father's lead head of security, Marcus. "Master Devin," Marcus said, his voice a polished threat. "Your father is concerned about your temporary lapse in judgment. He's waiting in the car. We're here to escort you to the airport. The Vane family is expecting a meeting." Devin stood up, his heart dropping into his shoes. The old terror clawed at his throat. "They tracked the car. They waited for us to be alone." "He's not going anywhere," Victor said. He didn't rise from the bench immediately. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. When he did stand, his alpha presence didn't just flare, it exploded. The air became heavy, saturated with the scent of a forest on fire. "Mr. Bishop," Marcus said, his confidence wavering. "This is a family matter. The Dalcarlo family is reclaiming its ward." "Devin is not a ward. He is a man." Victor stepped in front of Devin, his back a broad, unshakable wall. "And as of 5 minutes ago, he is under my personal protection, not as a fiancé, but as a sovereign individual. If you take one more step, I won't call the police. I will call the banks that hold your employer's remaining line of credit, and I will collapse the Dalcarlo name before you reach the end of this pier." Devin reached out, gripping the back of Victor's jacket. He could feel the heat radiating off him. "He's not just protecting me," Devin realized. "He's giving me the space to speak." Devin stepped out from behind Victor's shadow. His lavender and cinnamon scent was no longer a submissive perfume, it was sharp, seasoned with the fire of his own independence. "Go back to my father," Devin said, his voice echoing over the sound of the waves. "Tell him he can keep the money. He can keep the estate. But he will never see me again. I've found a family that doesn't have a price tag." Marcus looked at the fury in Victor's eyes and the iron in Devin's posture. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. Without a word, he signaled the men back into the SUV and sped away into the night. The silence that followed was broken only by the lapping of the water. Victor turned to Devin, the fire in his scent receding, replaced by a desperate, quiet concern. "Are you okay?" Devin took a shaky breath, then lunged forward, burying his face in Victor's chest. "I'm better than okay," he whispered. For the first time, Devin didn't feel like a rogue running away. He felt like a man who had finally arrived. Chapter 8, Bloom Amidst the Ashes. The aftermath of the pier felt like the first deep breath after a lifetime underwater. The threat of the Dalcarlo name didn't vanish overnight, but the power it held over Devin's soul had been burned to ash. A week later, the small apartment in the bruised brick walk-up was overflowing. It was a victory dinner, though the victory was less about a fallen empire and more about a found life. The kitchen was a chaotic masterpiece of scents. Miko's honeysuckle was bright and celebratory as he buzzed around the room, setting out a mismatched collection of plates. Elijah's cedarwood was a steady, grounding bass note as he helped Victor, the man who once owned the building's corporate parent, struggle with a stubborn wine cork. "You're holding it like a boardroom gavel, Victor," Elijah teased, his voice devoid of the corporate deference he'd once felt. "Give it a little twist. It's a Cabernet, not a hostile takeover." Victor laughed, a genuine, chesty sound that Devin still found himself pausing to admire. "I'm learning, Elijah. I'm learning." Devin stood at the counter, putting the finishing touches on a tray of rosemary focaccia. The bread was warm, smelling of salt and earth. As he worked, he felt a pair of hands settle gently on his waist. He didn't flinch. He leaned back into the heat of Victor's chest, the scent of coffee and wood smoke now synonymous with safety. "You're thinking again," Victor whispered against his ear. "Just thinking about the first time I walked into this room," Devin said, turning in Victor's arms. "I was so terrified of you. I thought you were the end of the world. And now?" Devin looked around the room. He saw Miko laughing at something on his phone, the fierce Omega who had taught him that defiance was a virtue. He saw Elijah, the alpha who showed him that strength could be quiet and kind. And he looked at Victor, the man who had given up a masterpiece to gain a partner. "Now, you're just the guy who lives across the hall and keeps trying to buy my favorite pastries to impress me," Devin teased, reaching up to brush a stray lock of hair from Victor's forehead. "Is it working?" Victor asked, his eyes softening with an intensity that made Devin's breath hitch. "The pastries help. But the guy is doing all right on his own." They moved to the table, the four of them squeezed together in the cramped dining nook. There were no silk tablecloths, no silver service, and no hushed, suffocating conversations about mergers. Instead, there was the clinking of cheap glasses and the roar of Miko recounting his latest investigative scoop. "This is it," Devin thought, his inner monologue finally silent and at peace. "This is the destiny I forged." The Dalcarlo estate was currently being liquidated, the scandal of his father's embezzlement finally hitting the news. Devin had signed the papers to waive his inheritance, funneling the remains of his trust into a foundation for runaway Omegas. He didn't want the gold, he wanted the grime of the bakery and the freedom of the streets. As the night wound down, Miko and Elijah retreated to their room, leaving Devin and Victor on the small fire escape outside the window. The city hummed below them, a sea of lights and sirens. "I have a confession," Victor said, looking out at the skyline. "I never liked the coffee at the estate. It was always too perfect. Too filtered." Devin leaned his head on Victor's shoulder. "And the coffee here? It's bitter, it's usually burnt, and it's the best thing I've ever tasted," Victor said, pulling Devin closer. He turned and pressed a kiss to Devin's temple, his scent of wood smoke mingling perfectly with Devin's lavender and cinnamon. There was no contract. There was no bond forced by tradition or biology. There was only the quiet, steady rhythm of two hearts choosing each other in the dark. "I'm not a Dalcarlo anymore," Devin whispered into the night air. "I know," Victor replied, his voice a promise. "You're Devin. And that's exactly who I've been looking for." The rogue Omega had stopped running. Not because he was caught, but because he had finally found a place worth staying. Epilogue. The morning sun spilled across the wide planked oak floors of the new apartment, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. This place wasn't a cold penthouse, nor was it the cramped walk-up of 4B. It sat in the heart of the arts district, a converted industrial loft with huge windows, exposed brick, and a kitchen large enough for a professional baker. Devin stood at the center island, his hands moving with practiced grace as he braided a massive loaf of challah. He didn't wear scent blockers anymore. The air in the loft was a rich, heady blend of lavender, cinnamon, coffee, and wood smoke. It was the smell of a home that had been built, not bought. A pair of strong arms wrapped around his waist, and a warm chin tucked into the crook of his neck. "The roommates will be here in 20 minutes, Victor murmured, his voice thick with a contentment that had smoothed the sharp edges of his face over the last year. "Are you sure we have enough food? I can call that deli on the corner." Devin laughed, leaning back into the heat of the man who had become his gravity. "Victor, I've baked 3 types of bread, a tart, and Elijah is bringing enough wings to feed a stadium. We're fine. Relax." "I just want it to be perfect," Victor said, his grip tightening slightly. The housewarming felt more like a family reunion. When the buzzer rang, it wasn't a formal greeting, it was the sound of Miko's chaotic energy and Elijah's deep laughter echoing up the stairs. "Look at this place!" Miko shouted the moment he crossed the threshold, his honeysuckle scent trailing behind him like a kite. He dropped a heavy box on the counter. "I brought the good wine. And by good, I mean the stuff that actually has a cork and didn't come from a box." Elijah clapped Victor on the shoulder, the two alphas sharing a look of mutual respect. Elijah had been promoted to a director role, but he still wore the same battered leather boots. "Nice bones, Victor. Much better than that glass cage you used to live in." The evening was a blur of mismatched laughter and the comfortable clink of glasses. They sat on the floor around a low coffee table, the fire in the hearth mimicking the wood smoke of Victor's scent. For a while, they simply existed, for outcasts who had built a world where the old rules of alpha command and omega submission didn't apply. As the city lights began to twinkle outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Victor stood up, clearing his throat. His sense suddenly spiked, not with the fire of aggression, but with a sharp, terrifyingly vulnerable spark of nerves. "A year ago," Victor began, his eyes locked on Devin, "I stood in a kitchen and told a stranger I wanted to earn the right to know his name. I told him I'd burned a contract because I didn't want a merger, I wanted a partner." Miko went silent, his glass halfway to his mouth. Elijah leaned back, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple wooden box. He didn't stay standing. He dropped to one knee on the rug, right there in the middle of their new home. "Devin, you've spent your whole life being told who you are and where you belong. You ran away to find your freedom, and in doing so, you saved me from the man I was becoming. I don't have a contract for you. I don't have a merger. I just have a question." He opened the box. Inside wasn't a diamond the size of a marble, it was a simple band of hammered silver, inlaid with a thin strand of copper. "Will you keep choosing me? Every day, for the rest of our lives?" Devin felt the tears hit his cheeks before he could even blink. He looked at the ring, then at the man who had traded an empire for a bakery-scented loft. He looked at Miko and Elijah, the family who had held him together when he was a ghost. "I stopped being a rogue a long time ago, Victor," Devin whispered, his voice thick with joy. He reached out, pulling Victor up so he didn't have to look down at him. "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." As Victor slid the ring onto Devin's finger, Miko let out a deafening cheer, and Elijah started pouring more wine. The scent in the room, lavender, cinnamon, coffee, wood smoke, honeysuckle, and cedar, swirled together into a single, unbreakable chord. The rogue Omega hadn't just found a destiny. He had finally found his North Star. Thank you for listening. Do you want a side story for Miko and Elijah? Let me know in the comments down below.